In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use sidechain compression in a dense mix to bring clarity back to sounds that are getting lost. Let's dive into it. The first trick or technique I'm going to show you is an oldie but a goodie. We're going to sidechain the kick to the bass. What that means is that every time the kick hits, the bass is going to duck a little bit. We're going to do this in a way that we don't really notice it happening, but it's going to bring a little bit more punch to the kick. Let me show you how I set this up. On our bass channel, we're going to load up a compressor. I generally just like to grab the Logic stock compressor. It's got low latency and it's fast and it's transparent, and that's all I need when doing sidechain compression. So to start with, let's change a few settings on here. Auto gain off, auto release off. Then we're going to put our attack fastest and our release fastest. We do this so that when the kick hits, the bass gets pushed down straight away, and then as the kick disappears, the bass gets brought back up straight away. So it's very quick. We're going to set our ratio to about 4:1. It's a good starting point. We're going to come up to the top right-hand corner to our sidechain section. If you can't see this, click on this little tab here. And then we're going to choose from audio. I'm going to use kick trigger. This is my kick sample. And the reason I'm using the sample rather than the mic that was on the actual bass drum is the sample doesn't have any of the bleed in it, and we won't get any extra compression happening from any bleed in the mic. So now let's solo our bass and our kick, and let's have a listen to how this sounds. When we play with that threshold knob, we can dial in how much compression is happening when the kick hits. So you can hear as I pulled it down, the bass really started to get ducked by the kick, but all we want is roughly 2 to 3 dBs of gain reduction just to help that kick poke through a little bit more and just push the bass down while it's hitting. Now, that's one way we can sidechain our kick and bass together. The other way is using a multi-band compressor. So I'm going to use FabFilter Pro MB. You could use something like Wave C6, or I'm sure there's plenty of other multi-band compressors out there. Just make sure you use one that has sidechain feature. Okay, to start with, we need to click over here to set up a low shelf. I'm going to drag this back to around 200 Hertz. Just want to get all that low end information. And then we're going to come down here to attack, make it fastest, 0%, release 0%. Ratio is already 4:1. And then we're going to come over to our expert settings over here and choose external EXT. That's going to activate the sidechain. So then we come up to sidechain in the top right hand corner and we're going to choose our kick trigger again. Let's have a listen to what this does. So it's pretty cool. You can push this pretty far without it being too noticeable. And all that is doing is every time the kick hits, the low end gets pushed down, but all the top end, mid-range, trebly information is just staying right where it is. So you can still hear that grindy pick sound, and it's not as noticeable that there's some ducking going on. It's just the low end of the kick and the bass aren't fighting when the kick hits. So a really great way of cleaning up and tightening the low end's relationship between the kick and the bass. Okay, so we're going to take all that stuff we just did and apply it to the snare and the guitars. So we're going to sidechain our snare to our rhythm electric guitar here. So I've already got a compressor set up here, Logic stock one again, fastest attack. I've just got an auto release on this and 4:1 ratio. Sidechain to our snare, and let's have a listen to this soloed. So same kind of idea, we're just getting that snare to pop through a little bit more by pushing those rhythm guitars down a touch every time it hits. Now, we can apply a similar thing with the multi-band compression, where we only focus on the fundamental of the snare and maybe even just the crack and attack on that top end of the snare. So I'll show you how I set this up. We grab our multi-band compressor again, set our sidechain to snare. Now what we're going to do is set up a bell around the fundamental frequency of the snare. So with this snare's tuning, it's sitting around 200 Hertz. So we're going to set up a bell here, fastest attack, fastest release, and make sure we have external turned on in the expert settings. And we're going to make another one up here. This time I might make it a shelf around 3K. Fastest attack, fastest release, Turn external on again. Now let's have a listen to this, and I'll play around with the threshold and the range, and we'll try and get something dialed in here. So that's really cool. It's just pushing down that low end a little bit to let the fundamental of the snare through, and we're pushing down some of those upper high mids to let the crack of the snare in, and all of that mid-range information on the guitar is being untouched. So it's making it a bit more transparent, and the parts of the snare that we want to have poked through are poking through a little bit better. Let's have a listen to the side chaining that we set up for the kick and the bass, and the snare and the guitars together in the mix. So I don't know about you guys, but I feel like when that's turned on, the kick and the snare are just punching through the mix just a little bit better. On a bit of a side note, today I'm using the Neumann TLM 103 on my voice instead of the SM7B. What do you think sounds better? Let me know in the comments below. This next way of using sidechain compression is really cool at making your room mics explode a little bit more in your mix. So I'll show you what I mean. At the end of my room mic channel strip, I have a reverb. Having a reverb at the end of this is pretty important to making it sound a bit more authentic. Before the reverb, we're going to put our multi-band compressor. So what we're going to do is set up a band and make it the whole frequency spectrum here. Just one big band. Fast attack, fast release. Make sure it's on external in the expert mode. Come up to sidechain. We're going to choose our snare. So we're going to make our room mics really pop when the snare hits. Now instead of compress mode, we're going to put it on expand mode. So it's turned the signal down a bit now by whatever I have the range set to. So we might bring this down like 10 dB, right? When the snare hits, we're going to get the room mics to get thrown up 10 dB. And then by having the reverb after this, it's going to carry that sound a little bit extra. So it doesn't sound so gated, like shh. It'll actually carry the sound when it hits. So let's have a quick listen to what this sounds like at the moment. So you can hear when it's turned on, it's pulling all that room sound down, but it's pushing that snare up when it hits. If we wanted to tidy this up a little bit more, we could maybe trigger off of a snare sample. So let's find a snare sample. So that sounds a bit better. We don't get the kick and other stuff trying to trigger this. So we're actually just getting the snare now, triggering the room. So let's see how extreme we can take this. So a pretty cool trick if you just want to make your rooms pop more on the snare, and then you can just mix that into taste. Pretty sweet. So this next way of using sidechain compression is really useful if you have a dense mix with lots of sounds and you're finding it hard to get your vocals to sit in the mix nicely. There might be a lot of different sounds and frequency masking happening, and you just can't get them to sit in there. So that's where this technique can come in handy. The way we would set this up is we'd get all of our instruments and we would send them to a bus. So I've got these sent to bus 21, which is our instrument bus over here. Now our vocals and our instrument bus are being sent to the mix bus. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put our multi-band compressor on the instrument bus, and we're going to set a band in the mids around 1K for now. Let's make our attack fast, fairly quick release, and make sure it's compress mode, external. Let's sidechain it now to our bus 10. That's where all my vocals are. So we're going to sidechain it to the vocal bus. So now every time the vocals are singing, it's going to push down on this band, and we're going to try and make the vocals sit in the mix a little bit nicer by compressing some mid-range frequencies.
You
So somewhere around there in that kind of like 700-800 hertz region, we just get a little bit of a push down there, pushes down some guitars and frequencies that are all kind of fighting for attention, and it lets the vocals sit in there a little bit nicer. You could hear when I pushed it really far, the mix started to fall apart and sound pretty nasty. So you got to be subtle with it, just a couple of dB at best, really. And that's one really great way of trying to help your vocals fit in a dense mix. This can be really useful if you're working on a track where someone's just sent you an instrumental and a vocal and they're asking you to combine them together. You don't have all the individual stems to play with and carve out space for the vocals. So this technique can work really well on an instrumental track and sidechaining the vocal to it just to help the vocals sit in the track a little bit nicer. And for this last one, I'm going to show you a technique where we sidechain an effect send. So this is going to mimic a little bit of throw delay where you would manually put a delay on and throw it up in the gaps between a vocal. The sidechain compression is going to push the effect down, and when the vocal stops singing, it's going to release it and throw it back up into our faces. So to start with, we need to set up a send on our vocal bus. I'm going to go to bus 23, and I've put a delay on here, echo boy, and I'm just using a quarter note delay, fair bit of feedback going on here, bunch of saturation, and just rolled out some low end. That sounds like this.
I can crash down walls, you see, yeah. I can take away
It's pretty full on. We might even just pull that feedback back a little bit. So after our delay plug-in, we're going to add a compressor. Logic stock again for me. Fastest attack, fastest release, 4:1 ratio again. Now this time we're going to set the sidechain to bus 10, which is my vocal bus. And then we're going to play up the threshold and push this delay down until it's not really in our face anymore, but it gets thrown up in the gaps.
I can crash down walls, you see, yeah. I can take away the lies that breathe. You wouldn't have it any other way. You wouldn't have it any other way.
Somewhere around there, right? It still sounds pretty intense when it's soloed, but let's hear it with everything around it and see how it's sitting. So that sounds pretty cool. You can hear that echo on the word I, any other way, and then it like echoes after it. So it's sounding pretty good. And you could play with that. You could pull the send back a little bit if it's still too loud. But I think kind of where the sidechain compression is sitting there and how it's responding is pretty good. And then it'll just be a matter of getting that level of the effect right in the mix. And that's just a quick way of mimicking a throw delay without having to manually do it. If you guys have some cool tips or tricks on how you like to use sidechain compression, drop it down in a comment below. I'd love to see what you're doing. I hope you guys found this video useful. If you enjoyed the content, make sure you hit like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you know when these videos get posted. As always guys, thanks heaps for watching. Really appreciate your support for the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.